Hi everyone. I have an example chat application, and sometimes we discuss with our developers what's the best way of selecting the elements. Maybe we're missing good test element selectors. Often we select by class or by text, and this is not the best Cypress practice. Some elements do have data sci or data test ID attributes, right? But some just have, it's a button with a word send, which could be misleading and is not the best selector. Sometimes we use a class like this one about name class, chat number of users. So when you tell people, hey, this page is missing selectors, like this test doesn't operate using good selectors, people say, well, where are the selectors? How many selectors do I need to add? I will show you a way to show everyone on your team visually which elements on the page during the test do have good data attributes for selecting elements and which elements do not have good element selectors so you can add them. So we're going to take this test right here and it goes through the test, and here's what we're going to do before each test. We have to figure out where the styles are coming for our application. So I will open the DevTools. I'm going to look at the network. I'll filter all requests by CSS, and I can see that we're loading a couple of fonts, and then we're loading the style CSS that provides the styles for our application. Now, we could modify this style CSS, right? But we don't want to modify it in a way that will affect production users, right? We only want to modify it when Cypress is testing it. So here's what we will do. We're going to intercept the calls to style CSS, right? So this is the CSS style CSS, right? And we can give it an alias so we can see it in the log. Let's take a look. So look, all the different pages are loading the same CSS resource. Now notice something else. The first time we load, we get 200. The server sends it. The second time we load, we're getting 3 or 4. The server saying the CSS resource hasn't changed, so the application in the browser should just use the cached resource. This is important. We'll have to deal with this later. Okay, so if we're intercepting, let's modify this resource. All right, so first we get the request. Well, we're not interested in the request just yet. We're interested in continuing it all the way to the server and getting the response. And what we can do with response, we can say the body, which is the current CSS file, we want to append. And what do we want to append? Well, we want to take all elements that have data sci attribute, right? We don't care about value, any value, right? And we want to add a style. So I'll say border 2 pixel solid red. Now it's very important to add important because many elements might have the current border already set. So we want to really show it. Okay, notice it doesn't show up, right? Why is that? Well, because we're not even getting the style. We're getting 3 or 4. And that means that our body is not used, the browser is used, the row is cached. Now, there are different ways of caching. In my application, I need to do the following. I know that each request, right, when it flies over the wire, let's say like right here, there are certain request headers. And notice if modify since header and if none match header. So this is used by the server to check if it needs to send a new CSS file. If the file still has this E tag, then it matches and then it returns 3 or 4. So if we want to avoid caching and sending 3 or 4 response from the server, we need to remove those headers from the request before it continues. So this is what we will do. We'll just delete those 2 headers. Now let's look at this. Now notice each CSS response gets 200 and it has the body, so it's now cached. And now we can see the border that we added to each element that does have data sci attribute. Now one trick that I will suggest, border of 2 pixels will push all our elements around because it takes up space. So you can use a margin of -2 pixels, right, to offset it back so that the elements are in the same position and the border is inside the element. Okay, so we can see which elements on this page have data psi. We can see, for example, the room name and the number of users do not have data psi. We can see that the list of users doesn't have data psi. Even this input box doesn't have data psi attribute. And if we hover over previous commands, right, and the time traveling debugger shows us what's happening, we can see that, again, even on this page, some elements like this create your first room button have data psi, but this input or list of rooms or this hamburger icon do not have data psi attributes. So this is the video you can generate, show to a team, and tell someone, or do it yourself, and say, I'm going to work on adding data psi attributes so my tests are following Cypress's best practices.